Next behind the mic is a writer and educator born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago to an Italian-American mother and a Yugoslavian-born father. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College, as well as a Bachelor of Science in journalism and anthropology from NIU. She currently works in academic administration, which is as boring as it sounds but pays the bills, and also teaches writing workshops throughout the Chicago area, most recently the Writers' Playground as part of the Elgin Literary Festival. She previously worked as a professional journalist at various suburban Chicago newspapers, including the West Chicago Press and the Naperville Sun. Her creative work has appeared in the Pitkin Review, where she also held the position of associate editor and critical commentary editor. Please put your hands together for Melissa Franic.
You did good.
Is that good height? No, that's not too high. There.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Hi. Thanks everyone for coming. All right. So I am, like he said, my name is Melissa Franic, and I like to write a lot about cultural identity and heritage. And I'm going to read an excerpt from a chapter in a memoir that I'm working on. And to give a little bit of background about this piece, in 2013, I traveled to Croatia with my then 78-year-old father, who emigrated here from the former Yugoslavia to the United States in 1954. So he's only been back to his home country a few times, and this was the first time I went back with him since 1984, when I was 9 years old. And his hometown is called Split, and it's on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. And this chapter is about an all-day tour we took to 7 islands on this crazy high-speed boat called a Glisser. The first stop on the tour was the famous Blue Cave on a tiny island called Bishovo, and this is an excerpt from that chapter. It's called The Blue Cave of Bishovo. Okay. We were in an 8-person rowboat about to enter the Blue Cave, and Dad was fiddling with his digital camera, which he couldn't get to work. Dad, just stop, don't worry about it. But of course, he wouldn't listen. We had to get off the Glisser and board a smaller rowboat when we arrived at Bishovo. As the rowers took us away from the beach and around to the eastern side of the islands, we approached an archway, a tiny crag of sea rock, and I thought, surely this is not the entrance into this cave. It's too small. And then the woman next to me said something about being claustrophobic, and as we moved closer, I braced myself. This was the entrance, about 4 foot high and 6 feet wide. I sucked in my breath as the rowers brought us near to the opening. Dad, I think we have to duck down. What? He was still fucking with his camera. Now, it's hard for him to use a camera on a good day, not to mention while we're in a rowboat about to enter a sea cave, but he was persistent. Dad, duck down. Finally, I reached up to grab his head and push it down. He looked up in time to realize we were about to enter the Blue Cave and held his hand out to press my head down instead. Duck down, Melissa, here we go. Time slowed down as I felt a rush of expectation, not unlike the pause that you feel at the top of a roller coaster, the anticipation of waiting for the drop after a long, slow climb. When I was about to sit back up, I balanced along the edge of the seat as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The small rowboat slowly floated down a pitch-black, narrow passage. Ahead was a glow of ethereal light, the electric shade of teal and prismatic reflection. I looked over at my dad and saw a small electric glow lighting his face. His focus was on the camera again. Dad, stop fucking with the camera. But he wouldn't, and I shouldn't have expected him to. I had come to terms with this fact that we weren't going to take any pictures, and I decided just to focus on the present moment. And I really wanted him to do the same, to soak in as much as possible of this glowing blue atmosphere, the result of light from above refracting from an opening below that creates a kaleidoscopic effect. Enclosed in this small space, I felt safe enough to lean over and place my hand in the water. It was cold. A school of tiny fish just below my hand emitted an effervescent glow. Dad, look, I said, splashing down at the water. My father was still playing with his camera. Dad, seriously, look around you. His response? Yeah, I've seen it before. It was useless to argue. So he did see it before, once, when he was 9 years old. There were always ships that came to dock in the port town of Split, and my dad's fascination with those ships and boats led him to sit for hours looking out at the sea. One day, as he was inspecting a fancy new cruise ship, a man ushered him to get on board because they were leaving soon. They thought he was a child of one of the passengers, and he got on board and watched quietly as this cruise liner drifted away from his hometown. The cruise ship slowly passed between the islands of Sholta and Brach, which are the ones closest to the mainland. As Split became smaller and smaller in the distance, and as he floated away from those islands, my dad acknowledged this was the furthest he had ever been from home. The island of Hvar was ahead, and beyond that, the island of Vis. Although a short boat ride away, my father had never been to either of these places. He had heard stories, of course, about the great Franciscan monastery in Hvar City. He thought about this as the cruise ship sailed past Hvar, venturing further out into the open Adriatic Sea. Vis is a small island originally settled by Greek fishermen over 3,000 years ago. Much like Croatia itself, the island has passed hands from the Greeks to the Italians to the Yugoslavs and currently to the Croats. From the coast of Split, this was the furthest occupied island out to sea. And for most of his lifetime, Vis was a military base for members of the Yugoslav partisan resistance and was not a place where civilians were allowed to visit. The cruise ship sailed past Vis without stopping. This, my father said, was when he finally got a twinge of panic. There was nothing beyond Vis except for the open waters of the Adriatic and then eventually way out the shores of Italy. As the ship went further out, Dad started to wonder if it was going to continue all the way to Italy. Although he was a little panicky, he said he wasn't too worried, and I sometimes forget that at the age of 9, he had already witnessed bomb attacks and military invasions. He had scraped bits of human bone fragments and skin off of his shoes and rode, against his will, in the blood-smeared trucks of Nazi soldiers. Worrying about his fate from the deck of this luxury cruise ship was farthest thing from his mind. All things familiar were passing by, things that he knew about, even though he had never fully explored. On a clear day, Vis is barely visible from the mainland. It's cast far away, like a haze, like a dream, and here he was sailing beyond it. He had no way of knowing that the next time he took that passage, his life would change forever, or that one day he would return there with his youngest daughter. At that point, he wasn't thinking about children or the future or anything other than how he was going to contact his family if he wound up in Italy. He hoped that's where the ship was going, but was too afraid to ask any of the employees or passengers for fear they would realize he didn't belong there and abandon him somewhere. He had no choice but to surrender to this circumstance. With the Vis barely behind them, the ship abruptly stopped. They docked at an island so small he didn't even know if it had a name. He witnessed a small segment of rocky beach and the cleanest turquoise water he had ever seen. The crew ushered all the passengers off the boat onto a small beach and led them to a series of tiny rowboats. Dad went along with the crowd, keeping quiet, letting his curiosity overtake his fear. Into a rowboat he went, out into the open waves of the Adriatic. The rowboat splashed towards a rocky crag of white limestone jutting out from the sea. He noticed a small opening ahead, and a woman sitting beside him pressed his head down to duck as they entered a cave. When his eyes adjusted, he felt transported into a magical place. During the day, the sun reflects down upon this cave, with sunbeams sneaking in through an opening underneath. The entire cave and everything in it sparkles and shimmers as light bounces off in diamond shapes of rainbow prisms. Until that day, Dad didn't know about this blue cave, and the first known travelers had entered this particular cave in 1884, when the seawater shifted enough to reveal an opening. Dad later learned that the name of the island was Bishevo, but he didn't tell anyone in his family that he saw it with his own eyes until many years later. After some time in the Blue Cave, my dad returned with the passengers to the cruise ship. It didn't continue on to Italy, it turned around and traveled back to Split. As the mainland of his hometown became nearer and nearer, Dad was thrilled about his secret adventure. He dreamed of other places and other lands, foreign and exotic and glowing and kaleidoscopic. What other wonders awaited? And then here, it jumps ahead a little bit, and we go to our last island stop, which is the island of Hvar, which is one of the closest islands to the mainland, and I had been there once before in 1984. So every once in a while, over the past decade, the island of Hvar is mentioned in popular culture. It's always when someone famous visits. In August of 2011, Prince Harry of England fell into a swimming pool in Hvar City while partying at a nightclub, and it made the news. The same year, Beyoncé and her husband Jay-Z visited. She was pregnant at the time and later named her baby girl Blue Ivy, reportedly in honor of the blue ivy trees on Hvar Island. These famous tourists have brought a lot of attention to the Croatian coast, which my dad totally hates. We didn't intend to stop there, but it was part of our island tour, and I didn't mind getting another look at the Franciscan monastery that I saw 30 years earlier. Dad and I walked along the beach to Juarez City, eating cones of gelato, his chocolate and mine strawberry. Growing up in this culture, Dad barely noticed all the naked swimmers, but every once in a while, I did a double take when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. We stopped at a small merchant kiosk and bought lavender to bring back as souvenirs for our family and friends. It is in a country where lavender is highly regarded that grown on the island of Juarez is considered the most luxurious. Juarez already has a level of infamy for its lavender and its nude beaches, but it's become even more famous now that Beyonce has made this place a popular destination among the young and rich, the kind of people who own yachts. You know that the Boyance, she wanted to patent the name Blue Ivy, my dad says. Dad can't pronounce Beyonce's name. No matter how hard he tries, he calls her Boyance, like Boyance. It's Beyonce, I correct him. Boyance, whatever. Who does she think she is, trying to patent something that doesn't even belong to her? Dad and I sit on the docks and finish our gelato. You know, I have a picture of you and your stupid sister sitting right here eating gelato with these miserable looks on your faces. I laughed as I thought of that picture. Let's take a picture now, Dad. We did, and I love that picture. My dad looks like a tourist with a floppy hat and a man purse, and I've adapted quickly to the island lifestyle, and I'm wearing what I've concluded is the only one-piece bathing suit on the entire island. This was one of a few days where we got to spend time exploring for ourselves. From the time we landed, my Aunt Nella had coordinated with the other family members and made all our plans for us. It was rare that we had a moment unscheduled, but it was fine because they were overly accommodating. And my Aunt Nella fed us on her balcony and bragged how everything she served she grew herself or bought locally through a co-op. When they weren't cooking elaborate meals for us, my cousin Radislav got us tables at the best restaurants in town and called ahead to make sure they were serving us only the freshest fish that was in season. You know, I'm sorry we never made it to Dubrovnik, Melissa, but it's okay, Dad. On this trip, I wanted to reconnect with something elemental to my shared genetic map. But there was too many things to do and not enough time. It's a bunch of old buildings and a lot of walking around, he said. Yeah, I figured as much, but I would have liked to go one day. You will, honey. Those buildings have been here for 1,000 years, and they'll likely be here for 1,000 more, but your relatives might not always be here.